War of the Worlds Retelling Chapter 13. After seeing how strong Earth's weapons are, the Martians went back to where they started. They were in a hurry but slowed down because their companion was destroyed. They probably didn't notice small and unimportant victims like me. If they had left their friend and kept going straight to London, there would have been nothing stopping them except for big guns. They would have gotten to London before anyone knew they were coming. And it would have been sudden, terrible, and destructive like an earthquake that destroyed Lisbon a long time ago. But they weren't in a hurry. More and more cylinders came every day to help them. Meanwhile, the military and navy knew how powerful their opponents were, so they worked very hard. They set up new guns every minute and hid them behind trees and houses. The scouts were using mirrors to signal the gunners when the Martians were getting close. The Martians knew how dangerous it was to get too close to humans, so no one went near them unless they wanted to risk their life. It appears that the giants spent the earlier part of the afternoon moving everything from the second and third cylinders to their original pit on Horsell Common. One of the giants stood guard while the rest worked hard in the pit through the night. A large green smoke rose from the pit and could be seen from nearby hills. While the Martians were preparing for their next attack behind the Rider, people were gathering for battle in front. The Rider struggled to make their way from the burning weighbridge towards London. I saw a small, abandoned boat floating downstream and managed to catch it after taking off my wet clothes. There were no oars, so I paddled with my hands towards Halliford and Walton, always looking back in case the Martians came back. I followed the river because I thought it would be the best way to escape if the Martians returned. The hot water from the Martians' destruction flowed downstream with me, and for most of the way, I couldn't see either bank. At one point, I saw a group of people running across a meadow towards Weybridge. Halliford was empty, and some of the houses near the river were on fire. It was strange to see the place quiet and deserted under the blue sky, with smoke and flames rising straight up in the hot afternoon. I had never seen burning houses without a crowd watching. Further on, the dry reeds on the riverbank were on fire, and a line of flames was slowly moving across a field of hay. After the violent attack, I felt exhausted and drifted for a long time on the water. The heat was intense, and I began to feel very fearful again. But then, as I saw the Walton Bridge coming up, I couldn't paddle anymore because I was too sick and weak. I landed on the Middlesex bank and lay down in the long grass. It was around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. After a short while, I got up and walked half a mile without seeing anyone before resting again under a hedge. I remember talking to myself and feeling angry with my wife, though I didn't know why. I was very thirsty and regretted not drinking more water. I was also frustrated that I couldn't reach Leatherhead. I don't remember the curate arriving clearly, so I may have been dozing. When I became aware of him, he was sitting with his sooty shirt sleeves rolled up, staring at a flickering light in the sky. The sky was a mackerel sky, with faint clouds that were tinted by the midsummer sunset. I sat up and he looked at me when he heard the rustle. I asked him suddenly, "Do you have any water?" He shook his head and said, "You've been asking for water for the past hour." We looked at each other without speaking for a moment. I was in a strange condition, wearing only wet pants and socks, burned and covered in black soot on my face and shoulders. The man in front of me had fair skin, thinning chin, and curly hair that almost looked like flax. His eyes were big, pale blue, and blankly staring. He spoke suddenly, looking away from me. "What's going on?" he asked. "What does all of this mean?" I looked at him but didn't say anything. He stretched out his thin white hand and spoke with a slightly complaining tone. "Why did this happen? What did we do wrong?" I had finished the morning service and was taking a walk to clear my mind for the afternoon, and then disaster struck. It was like Sodom and Gomorrah all over again. All our hard work undone. Everything destroyed. "Who are these Martians?" I cleared my throat and replied, "And who are we?" He grabbed his knees and turned to face me again. He stared at me silently for about 30 seconds. "I was taking a walk to clear my mind," he said, and then suddenly, disaster struck. Fire, earthquake, death. He fell silent again and sank down with his chin almost touching his knees. He started waving his hand and lamenting about the destruction of their work, including the Sunday schools and the church, which had been rebuilt only 3 years ago. He was deeply troubled and asked why everything was destroyed. Suddenly, he erupted again and shouted about the smoke of the burning church going up forever. His eyes were blazing as he pointed his finger towards Weybridge. At that point, I realized that he was a refugee from Weybridge and the terrible events there had caused him to become almost insane. In a calm tone, I asked him if we were far from Sunbury. "What are we going to do?" he asked. "Are these creatures all over the place? Have they taken over the earth? Are we close to Sunbury? I performed a service there this morning." "Things have changed," I said calmly. "You must stay calm. There is still hope." "Hope? Yes, plenty of hope, despite all this destruction." I began to explain my thoughts on our situation. He listened at first, but as I continued, his interest faded and his gaze wandered from me. "This must be the start of the end," he said, interrupting me. "The end, the day of the Lord, when people will ask the mountains and rocks to fall on them and hide them from the face of God." I began to understand the situation. I stopped trying to explain things, got up, and stood over him. I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Be brave. You're frightened out of your mind. What good is religion if it falls apart in the face of disaster? Think of all the things that earthquakes, floods, wars, and volcanoes have done to people in the past. Did you think Weybridge was exempt from this? God is not an insurance agent." He sat in silence for a while, then suddenly asked, "But how can we escape? They're invulnerable, and they're merciless." "They may not be invulnerable or merciless," I said, "and the more powerful they are, the more careful we should be. One of them was killed not 3 hours ago." "Killed?" he said, looking around. "How can God's ministers be killed?" "I saw it happen," I told him. "We just happened to be in the middle of it." "What's that light in the sky?" he asked suddenly. "That's the heliograph signaling," I said. "It means that people are trying to help. We're in the middle of it, even though it seems quiet. That light in the sky is a sign of the coming storm. The Martians are probably heading this way again. And they're building defenses and putting up guns towards London, where the hills rise around Richmond and Kingston and the trees give cover." As I was speaking, the man suddenly stood up and signaled me to be quiet. "SHH, listen," he whispered. In the distance, beyond the hills and across the water, we could hear the muffled sounds of guns firing and strange cries. Then, everything became silent again. A beetle buzzed by us, and we looked up to see the crescent moon faintly shining above the smoke rising from Weybridge and Shepperton, against the backdrop of a beautiful sunset. "We should follow this path to the north," I suggested.